Hi, this is the Film Experience. I'm Jim, and welcome to my darkroom. So today we're going to look at is a very common question among new film photographers. They want to know, okay, I'm looking for a film camera, and how do I know that this camera I've got in front of me is actually going to work? So we're going to take a look at that today. I'm going to use this camera as an example. This is a Pentax K1000. Very common, very popular film camera. So how do we know if this thing is actually worth purchasing and if it's going to work for us? Let's take a look. Let's put it on the bench. Okay, when you go to take a look at a camera, there's a few things you should bring with you. One is an air blaster to be able to blow away dust, determine if a spot you see on a lens, for example, is dust or a scratch. A flashlight, and a coin. In this case, I have a screwdriver that's been specifically rounded off to fit into the battery slot on a camera. But you can do the same thing with just a coin. Do not bring a regular screwdriver to open the battery compartment. Okay, it will gouge it, something terrible. And do a little bit of homework and find out what kind of batteries your camera uses and bring along an extra set. Don't expect that the batteries in the camera, if there are any, actually work. Always bring some that you know are good. Okay, let's take a look at the camera. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the lens. Now we want to remove the lens from the camera, and most cameras will have a release just like the K1000 here. I push down this lever, turn, and twist, and off the lens comes. And now I want to give the lens a close look. When I run it through the different aperture settings, does it move easily? Is it stuck? I also want to check the focus movement. Sometimes these old lenses, when they get older, the lubrication in them, the oil, ends up turning into a glue, and you'll find it's really tough to turn. We also want to take a look inside the lens. Now, right now, that lens, the iris, I'm not sure if you can see it there, is completely closed. I want to open that up, so I'm going to open it to its widest position and take a look. And this is where the flashlight comes in. It helps to have a look in there. And I want to check the glass, looking for scratches, marks, especially looking for things called fungus, and I'll show you a picture of that here. Also want to look for something called separation or balsamic separation, and that happens when a lot of these elements are glued together. There's two pieces of glass sandwiched together with a balsam glue in between them. And sometimes those can begin to break down and separate, and you'll see that around the edge. And again, I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. So we take a look at the lens, and this one seems pretty clean. I'm not seeing any problem. I am seeing a little bit of dust in there. There might even be a little bit of minor haze. Those are incidental. They won't affect your images. If you're seeing a lot of haze or a lot of dust, especially really large chunks, then that might be a consideration. Also, when you close the iris down and you have a look at it, do you see any oil on the surface of those blades? A lot of times these old lenses, the oils and lubricants in them can break down and end up leaking, or worse, sometimes people decide to fix them and do silly things like spray WD-40 or other types of lubricants inside. Never do that. So that oil gets onto the blades and will hamper its use. Okay, so take a look. If you really like the camera body, but the lens, it's got some minor issues. Maybe it's a little bit stiff, maybe a little bit of oil on the aperture blades. The lens, if it's a good lens, it's probably worthwhile to send it off and get it serviced. We get something called a CLA, clean, lubricate, and adjust. And that can be done by any service facility relatively inexpensively, especially when you're talking a nice lens. So now let's turn our attention to the camera body itself. Since we've got the lens off, let's take a look inside the mirror box. And in here we're going to look for is the mirror actually there? Is it visible? Some cameras, the mirror may be stuck. And this one, it's sitting there. The mirror is right on the bottom. Right up at the top is the focusing screen. I want to take a look at that. Make sure there's no marks. It's not cracked. And also right at the front edge, not sure why you can see this, right along here, right in front of the focusing screen, is something called the mirror buffer, and it's just a bit of foam, and sometimes that can start to break down. Don't touch the mirror at all. Don't touch the mirror or the focusing screen, but when you touch the mirror buffer, and if that comes off, then that mirror bumper is breaking down and will need to be replaced. Okay, and looking in the camera, I'm not seeing anything unusual. Let's go ahead and put it on. I'm going to put it on a fairly slow shutter speed, and I just want to see the action of the mirror when I squeeze the shutter. It flips up and down again. Okay, so that looks like it's functioning normally. Now, while we're doing that, let's go ahead and run the camera on a test through the different shutter speeds. So I'm going to start off at 1,000th of a second. Advance. Now, before you do this, actually, one of the first things you should do is make sure your camera has no film. Just open up the rewind crank and crank, wind it. And yeah, there's nothing in there. But if you find it stops, you've probably got film in the camera. And you can rewind that by depressing the rewind button here on the bottom, and then just turning the rewind crank repeatedly until you feel the film lets go. Okay, now if you've got film in the camera, especially a really old camera, don't throw that away. I personally, I love developing those, and in some cases you've got a piece of history. I recently recovered film from an old camera, and it turned out the film dated back to the 1920s, and we were actually able to put the prints back into the hands of the descendants of the people in the photos. So anyway, let's go back to where we were. We're running through the shutter speeds. So I've currently got the camera set to 1,000th of a second. The film advance has been moved so it doesn't go any further. And I squeeze, and it seems to go off nicely. Advance, I'm going to put it to 500th of a second. It's hard to tell the difference between 1,000th and 500th, but let's give it a listen. Okay, and let's go down from 500th down to 250th. You should start to actually hear the difference in the shutter speeds as we move slower. Okay, let's go down to 125th. Definitely heard that. Start to hear the action of the shutter, the two different shutters moving. Let's go down to a 60th, and you'll for sure hear it here. Click, click. And 30th. 15th. 8th. Quarter. Half. And 1 second. Sometimes with these older cameras, the shutters can start to malfunction, especially on some of the slower shutter speeds. So we definitely want to check those out. And this one seems to be functioning fine. Okay, so shutter speed's done, and also while I advanced it, I noticed that the frame counter was moving as it's supposed to. So now let's go ahead and take a look inside. So on this camera, to open the back, not all cameras are the same, but on this one, this is pretty common. You lift the rewind crank up, pull it up just a little bit more, that releases the back. And we open the back, and when we look in here, Areas of interest. You want to make sure that it looks pretty clean. I'm not seeing any signs of rust. It doesn't look like water's gotten in. I look at the shutter itself, and I'm not touching it, but the shutter tends to be pretty delicate, so don't touch it. But that shutter, I'm not seeing any tears, any wrinkles. And let's actually take a look at the shutter, what happens when we fire it off and make sure it's working okay. So I've got it set to, let's do a 15th of a second. And when I squeeze the shutter, I can see it open and close. And then when I advance, you can see how the shutter moves across. So yeah, that shutter looks fine. The take-up spool sits right in here, and this little gear advances to carry the film over onto the take-up spool. Okay, and this little gear at this point should not be moving, but when I release the shutter and I advance the film crank, you see that that moves. Okay, and the take-up spool also moves as well. Okay, so everything in here seems to be working properly. Now, an area of particular interest is the light seals. So right at the top and bottom of the film door, right in here, there's a channel. And inside there, in that channel is a neoprene foam. On most cameras, that foam has started to break down, and in some cases may be completely missing. So there's also another one along the bottom channel. And on the door, this part of the door goes into those channels, and that's the light seal. That's what keeps light from getting into the camera. If those seals are going, you may find as you run your finger along the edge of the film door that there's a tarry black residue. And this camera has brand new light seals, so there's no issues there. But that's really common. Now, if it does happen, don't worry about it, because replacing the light seals is a fairly simple job, and most people can actually do it at home with some simple instructions. Okay, so that's the light seals. Oh, there's also on this camera, there's one more light seal, which is right along here, and it's a felt. Again, if it's degraded, it'll be coming off on your fingers, and no, this one seems to be fine. Okay, so light seals are good. Shutter seems to be functioning normally. Okay, and when I put the lens back on, everything seems to be functioning normally. So one last thing we're going to take a look at on this camera is the battery and the metering. So the battery is right in here. So you can open that with a coin. It's actually made uniquely to fit a Japanese, I can't remember how many yen coin, and I don't have one of those. You could try, in our case, Canadian nickel will work. I have a screwdriver that's been modified to do that. Don't stick a regular screwdriver in here, because that's a curved slot. A regular screwdriver will just gouge it, and this is very soft material and will be damaged. So use a coin, and on some cases, when you look at this, you might see material leaking through the edges of that door. That means the battery has exploded, and you may have difficulty opening the camera. But in this case, I'm not seeing any. So I put my coin in there and a couple turns. And out comes the battery cap and the battery. Now, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to take a look inside the battery compartment. So I want to have a look in there and see if there's any evidence of corrosion. When I look in there, it seems nice and clean. Not seeing any issues there. Also take a look at the battery cap. Any evidence of any corrosion residue from exploded batteries? Nope, not seeing any there. So now you could take a fresh battery, and in this camera, the negative end, which is the button end as opposed to the flat end. Flat end is the positive end. The negative end is the smaller button end. And in this camera, the button end goes down, and then the battery cap goes on top. Okay, so inserting the battery, easiest way to do that is to insert the battery into the battery cap. Positive end down, negative end up. Turn the camera over and slip the battery into the bottom. And just with a fingernail, give it a turn until the threads grab. Then you can take your coin and close it up. Don't put any force on this. Just gentle, fingers snug. Doesn't need a lot of force. Okay, and with that done, we're going to check the meter. And with some cameras, the meter doesn't turn on until you pull out the film advance mechanism. With this one, I don't need to do that. So I'm going to have a look through the viewfinder, and I'm going to aim it at a light source and watch for movement of the meter, and make sure that the meter's actually working. And you can move through different shutter speeds, or different apertures, I should say, and also different shutter speeds. If you're looking through, right now I'm in room light. If I had this set on thousandth of a second f/22, the meter's not going to be doing anything. So in room light, I'm going to bring that aperture and bring that shutter speed right down. I'm also going to open up the aperture, and just so that I can see some movement out of that meter to confirm that the meter is working. If you really want to know if the meter is absolutely accurate, download a metering app for your phone. There's a number of them. Light Meter Pro is an excellent one, and use that when you go out. Take a meter reading with that on the scene, and set that and your camera to the same ISO, same shutter speed, and same aperture, and make sure they read the same. Anyway, that is pretty much how you check out a camera. And if everything checks out okay, then you can be pretty safe that it's going to work out for you. Well, I hope you find a great camera. These old film cameras can easily last a lifetime. Make sure you give us a like and to subscribe. This is a new channel, but we have some interesting topics coming up, including how we found and actually restored a 150-year-old camera that was in a junk pile, and restored it back to shooting condition. Anyway, we're going to leave it there. Wishing you great light and inspiration. Thanks for watching.